let's talk about the update on the Ukraine aid. So last word from Mike Johnson was on Ukraine aid was last Sunday. He was on a TV program and he said that after the Easter break, which ends April 9th, the session comes back, to be in session. They were going to move on Ukraine aid as quickly as possible. They're going to move on it right away. Right away was the exact words. Now, less than 5 days later, we get a report. Actually, I think it's been it's been 4 days. We get a report from Bloomberg saying that's not the case, actually. It's far more likely that as the House comes back in session, that this is going to be delayed much longer, and that it's actually going to be weeks, at the very least, likely weeks more before any resolution is done, meaning we're going to be going into the late April period, according to these new estimates from anonymous senior Republican officials reported by Bloomberg. Now, of course, maybe something could change. The situation seems to be ever evolving and ever fluid, but this would be another further delay on Ukraine aid and would be, again, Speaker Johnson's second, third, fourth, who knows how many times it has been now, of him going back on previous commitments on Ukraine aid. First, he said he wouldn't abandon them. I would say at this point, they have been properly abandoned, as we have no more aid to send them, and we still have no more deal. Now we can maybe try to undo that, but I would say that's a commitment he broke. I would say this is a commitment he broke, because he said he wasn't going to, we were going to do it right away as April comes back around. And if he doesn't do that, as it looks like the reporting has indicated, that'd be another commitment he broke. There was also, hey, you know what? If we just get this border deal, if we can negotiate this border deal, then maybe we could have had a deal on it then. But then when we negotiated the border deal, and Senator Langford, conservative senator from Oklahoma, border hawk, a staunch conservative Republican, he negotiated a deal with Chris Murphy, and then nothing happened. Then Trump said to sink it, so he sunk it. So he keeps going back on his word. I mean, he's losing his credibility as a negotiator. Now, he could say, look, this is because of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look, this is because of these other people. But it's becoming impossible to trust him. And trust on a basic level is going to be important if he ever wants to reach out his hand and have Democrats save his ass if the far right want to toss him out. If he has to make some compromise, and that is necessary. He's going to need to make some compromises in the future with the Democrats controlling the Senate. And it's only going to become more and more difficult for him to do that the less and less he is trusted. And he's corroding that trust more and more. That trust as that he represents his party, that when he sits down and when they put down negotiating representatives to sit down and negotiate, that it means something. That this effort means something, that they're going to actually build something together, that these deals mean something, that this time committed to negotiate means something, and it isn't just a giant delaying tactic waiting for Donald Trump to get back in power so you can do everything without any commentary from your political opposition, which controls the presidency in the Senate right now, which is just so unfortunate for you. This is really, look, I never had a big respect for Mike Johnson. I remember when he said at the start, we're not going to abandon Ukraine. People in the pro-Ukraine crowd felt relieved because they were concerned after the Kevin McCarthy speakership race. But I remember looking at that voting records and I said it was piss poor. And I said, I don't think this is somebody that will stick his neck out for Ukraine. And if it comes with any political difficulty, it will become a problem. And by God, it has become a problem. It has become a problem. And so the only solution, in my mind, is to make it so not supporting Ukraine aid becomes a bigger political problem for him than opposing Ukraine aid or standing still on Ukraine aid, as he's in this Ukraine aid limbo since September. That's at least my position. Trying to continue to push the discharge petition. Again, the thing about discharge petitions is the majority of the time they're not successful, but they are successful pressure weapons. If you could get the discharge petition to up to 200, 205, 210, 211. If you can get it close, if you can get it within swinging range, where just like 5 more added would be able to put it over the top, the threat of it alone could force him to act. And look, he hasn't even put forward one of the, what I expect to be, shitty counter proposals of a loan plan, since Trump has been pushing that, and now they're talking about that in private. And if Donald Trump turns to Marjorie Taylor Greene and says, this is the plan, she will jump. But so far, Trump has done nothing but delayed aid to Ukraine. Now, I do want to bring attention to this, by the way, that this Axios reporter was reporting on the fact that Mike Johnson is also bringing us back to square one. Any funding of the president's supplemental request should be premised on the meaningful policy at our southern border. Now, I don't know if you guys were paying attention to the negotiations for the last 8, 9, 10 months. I don't know how much you guys have been paying attention. But there were 5 months of negotiation on border policy, and Senator Langford and Senator Chris Murphy sat down, negotiated, and came forward with a deal to compromise on the border. And then when the deal was put forward, Trump sunk it. You didn't even bring it up for a vote, and it was dead in the water. It was dead in the water. Because Trump wanted it gone. And so that 5 months of negotiation, all that work was for nothing. We're back at square one because Trump didn't want any big wins on the border. Because if he gave a big win on the border to Democrats, or made it look like it could even be interpreted that way, then that could hurt him, since that's his big issue. And so no deal. But if that's the motivation, why would Trump okay this compromise? We're back to square one, but we have the same problems. This is the demand that I don't think is possible to meet. This is a demand that I don't even think should be respected. We negotiated a deal. It was they shook hands, and then it was sunk immediately. And now we need to re-enter more negotiations. When is this going to get settled? By the time they settle on Ukraine aid, the war is going to be over. Wars do not work on legislative schedules. The wars work when the forces move, when the armies march, when the guns fire. And I'm telling you, every time the North Koreans send over shells, there is not much legislative deadlock. When the Iranians send over drones, there is not much legislative deadlock. But when it comes to us sending over Ukraine aid, even though it's supported by the majority of people in the Senate, majority of the people in the House, the president, and majority of Americans, there has been no movement since last September. 6 months of silence, legislative silence in the House. But hey, Matthew proposed a proposal, and I thought it was a great idea. Perhaps the Senate could work out a bipartisan bill featuring border measures, plus funding for Ukraine and Israel, and maybe even throw Taiwan in there. Maybe Senator Chris Murphy and Senator Langford could even negotiate. What a novel idea. I don't know why anybody didn't think of that. I do want to show you, though, the type of people that are holding him back right now. Because it is this woman that is holding the idea of throwing Mike Johnson out, throwing that I guess you can call that legislative gun to his head, as she's hovering over the idea of calling a recall vote and throwing him out and starting over the whole process. And she's making explicit that this is over Ukraine aid. She went on Tucker Carlson's show and expressed the sentiment. Let's check it out.
Mike Johnson has completely changed his character in a matter of about 5 months after he has become Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson is a Christian. He called himself a conservative, always has been. He's a Republican member, but yet here we are after the minibus was passed just almost 2 weeks ago in Washington, and now with the $60 billion going to a war in Ukraine that 70% of Americans do not support it. That's the most recent polling.
That's just a lie. That's just a lie. That's not what Pew Research Center says. That's not the most recent poll I saw showed the majority of Americans wanted to continue supporting Ukraine. And it was like a clear majority. It was, I think it was like 56 to 40. So it was plus 16 points, right? And that was like a CNN poll. So maybe you don't like CNN. Pew Research still has it, even at the lowest numbers, I think, a plurality. There's no polling data that says 70% of Americans are against any more aid to Ukraine. That's not true.
70% of Americans and the majority of Republicans do not support funding Ukraine. People want to see a peace deal in Ukraine, not murdering more Ukrainians and more Russians.
It's crazy that for her, sending aid to an ally is murdering more Ukrainians. Then here's my question. Why is her continued support for aid to Israel not murdering more Palestinians and more Israelis? What's the difference there? Is it that one is on team Jesus and the other is on team gay? What's the consistent position that, oh, sending weapons over here to the war that's been going on off and on since 2014, that's supporting some dumb forever wars that are going to get people killed. Sending weapons to the conflict that's been going on and off since 1948. Oh, actually, even before that, if you want to get into militia violence, no, that's not a forever war. That's different. That's not perpetuating violence. Just to use her own logic.
Needs to end. But no, Mike Johnson has made a complete departure of who he is and what he stands for. And to the point where people are literally asking, is he blackmailed?
By the way, can I say the omnibus thing? The reason it ended up being an omnibus bill is because it took so long and you had to negotiate at that point or the government was going to shut down. It's either omnibus or nothing was going to pass. The budget was supposed to be passed like last September and we passed it in like March of this year. That's embarrassing. It's so we're going towards September now. Before you know it, we're going to be negotiating another budget deal. So, I mean, what? Did we have to, or we're going to do more continuing resolutions? And what's bizarre is at the same time that they're not calling for an omnibus, at the same point, there's also a call for no more continuing resolutions, almost like they wanted to play footsie. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene was openly happy with this, with shutting down the federal government, which means workers would be furloughed, would mean shutting down National Park, meaning compromising government services for the people, which is supposed to be the most basic of their jobs, is making sure the government stays open. I mean, she can't even keep the lights on. She's okay with the lights going off. And this is the woman we should be following on foreign policy. This is the woman we should be following on anything, or that should be having any dictation on Republican policy. It's bizarre. It's bizarre how the rules have empowered psychos like this because Kevin McCarthy decided to sign the worst deal imaginable with the fringe.
And to the point where people are literally asking, is he blackmailed? What is wrong with him? Because he's completely disconnected with what we want.
Do you think he is being blackmailed?
I have no idea. I can't comprehend, Tucker, what radically changes a man. I mean, if we break down the...
He's literally... Come on. The idea that he wants to send anything over to Ukraine means that he's blackmailed. It means that, like, Chuck Schumer has, like, dirty pictures of him doing gay things or something. It's crazy. Dude, she's off the... I'm starting to think Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a rational politician.
Second part of basically an omnibus... Let's break that down. So Mike Johnson is pro-life. In the second part of the omnibus, just less than 2 weeks ago, he funded full-term...
By the way, I do not like listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but somehow people like her have wiggled herself into positions of power. And now with such a small conservative majority in the House, they have even more power. And so I don't want to listen to her either, but this blabbermouth knuckle dragger actually has influence.
Part of the omnibus just less than 2 weeks ago, he funded full-term abortion clinics. Full-term abortion clinics. He funded the trans agenda on children. I mean, how does that even happen from a Christian conservative Republican speaker? He did nothing for the southern border, did nothing to secure the border. And this,
you know, the reason why they're a Democrat, by the way, I don't even want to go in and like challenge individual things here. I'm just going to say this broadly. He is negotiating with Democrats that control the Senate. He has a very small majority, and you've got a Democratic president. You're going to have some Democratic priorities in the bill. It's going to be a compromise budget. You're not going to, with a 5-seat, now 1-seat majority, going to be dictating the budget from like the top of a mountain as if you are Noah handing down the 10 commandments. You are not. You're not handing down the 10 commandments. You can negotiate because you have a small majority, but you have to include democratic priorities because Democrats control the House, the Senate, and they control the presidency.
This comes on the
Yo, can we just like send her through the Schoolhouse Rock program quick and like have her come back and do politics over?
heels of Laken Riley being brutally murdered. This came on the heels of a video that was running on loop on social media where illegal aliens had rushed our border, ran over Texas National Guard, ran over Border Patrol agents in order to invade our country. These were military-aged men, by the way. He did nothing to secure a border. It's the #1 issue in the world. He completely changed who he was, funded the FBI, gave him a brand new building, fully funded the Department of Justice that is persecuting everyone on the right and actually targeting our presidential candidate.
Listen to her critiques. He funded the Department of Justice. He kept the lights on in a government institution that is, by the way, the Republicans take over. They're not going to get rid of the Department of Justice. They're just going to put in their own cronies. That's what Trump is openly saying he wants to do. So just like, how dare he keep the lights on in an institution that we want to take over? What's the critique?
For election this year.
Like, well, what was he supposed to do? Sorry, unless you shut down the Department of Education because of gay books. So if you don't shut down the Department of Justice, if you don't shut down, then we can't negotiate a budget. They're never going to do that. Her demands are impossible. It's just posturing for the public. What does she really want? If she really wants anything, or is she really just this dementedly stupid? She was a QAnoner, so it's not impossible.
Literally trying to put him in jail the rest of his life. We don't know who Mike Johnson is anymore, so there's no, I can't comprehend it.
Well, I have noticed just from living in Washington for so long that a lot of the top decision makers are lying about their personal lives. And there's something, really amiss there.
Mike Johnson's gay, guys.
And I would definitely say Mitch McConnell would be among those. And there does seem to be a connection between the creepiness of your personal life and the deception around your personal life and your willingness to vote with the other side. I mean, have you noticed this at all?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that the American people are extremely aware of because none of it makes sense. Yeah. How do you become Speaker of the House? And let's look at that. It's basically like there's establishment Washington runs like a company. We could call it the firm. Well, Mike Johnson just got promoted to senior partner at the firm because he has been obeying their every single demand. He funded the military. He funded the military-industrial complex and everything.
He funded the military? Oh, my God. A Republican funded the military? Scandalous from Marjorie Taylor Greene's perspective. Fuck off. She wants to send aid to Israel, and she clapped at every Trump budget.
That they want done. He funded Biden's open border invasion. He funded the Green New Deal, the climate agenda. He funded full-term abortion clinics, the trans agenda on kids. He funded every single thing that the firm stands for and what they're trying to push on the rest of the world. This is the agenda for the rest of the world. And they are not, they're not hiding it one single bit.
It can only be posturing. 1 second, listen to this. This is the best one, though. This is the best part.
And this isn't a Republican speaker we have right now. This is a Democrat speaker of the House because there is zero daylight between what Nancy Pelosi did last Congress and what Mike Johnson is doing now as our so-called Republican Speaker of the House.
No, there's no difference. You want to know one of the first differences that, sticks out to me? I remember like Mike Johnson being told like, hey, why can't we do Ukraine aid now? This is like months ago. And he said, well, because we have to do the budget first. And until we do the budget, we can't do Ukraine aid. And I thought, man, and I'm not a big Nancy fan, but Nancy could do more than 2 things at the same time. She could do 2 things, maybe even 3 things, maybe even 4. A Democrat speaker would fund Ukraine immediately. They would just like, it would be immediate vote and it would be immediately passed. That's what a Democratic speaker would do. If Hakeem Jeffries was speaker, that's immediately what would happen. And it would be voted on with Republican votes as well. Again, there are more than enough votes for the legislation to pass. Mike Johnson just continues to deny to hold a vote.